The morning sun filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Emma Mitchell sat on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 7B, her small legs dangling several inches above the ground, her pink Mary Jane shoes swinging back and forth in a nervous rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. She was 9 years old, with her mother's dark brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, a perfect blend of two people who no longer loved each other. Her hands trembled as they gripped a worn stuffed animal, a small golden retriever made of soft cotton, with button eyes and a stitched smile that seemed to mock the tears threatening to spill down Emma's cheeks. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her daughter, her arm wrapped protectively around the little girl's shoulders. Sarah was 37 years old but looked older today, worn down by a year of legal battles, emotional turmoil, and the constant, gnawing fear that she was going to lose the most important person in her life. She wore a navy blue suit, carefully selected by her attorney Marcus Johnson to project competence and stability, the outfit of a responsible mother, not the career-obsessed woman that David's lawyers had been painting her to be. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a strand out of place, though inside she felt like she was falling apart. "Mom, are we going to lose?" Emma whispered, her voice so small it was almost inaudible. She didn't look at her mother as she asked the question. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the courtroom door, as if something terrible might burst through at any moment. Sarah's heart cracked. How could she answer this honestly? How could she tell her daughter that the legal system, which was supposed to protect children's best interests, was about to be hijacked by a man with a grudge and a woman with sharp teeth and sharper words? How could she explain to a 9-year-old that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes circumstances and misunderstandings and the bitter aftermath of divorce could conspire to tear a family apart? "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, squeezing Emma gently. "We're not going to lose. The judge will understand. The judge will see that I love you more than anything in this world." But even as she said the words, Sarah wasn't sure she believed them. The past few weeks had been a nightmare. David's attorney, Catherine Wells, had methodically built a case against her that was simultaneously true and completely twisted. Yes, Sarah had worked late several times that month. Yes, there had been occasions when Emma had been picked up from school by a babysitter instead of Sarah. Yes, there had been a few weekend plans that had been rescheduled due to work emergencies. But the narrative that Catherine Wells had constructed wasn't about a hardworking single mother doing her best to provide for her daughter. It was about a selfish woman who had sacrificed her child on the altar of career ambition. Outside the courthouse, in the parking lot 3 stories below, Bailey waited in Sarah's car. The golden retriever was 3 years old, with a coat the color of honey and eyes full of unconditional love. Bailey had been in Emma's life since the little girl was 6 years old, arriving as a puppy on her birthday, wrapped in a red ribbon. The bond between Emma and Bailey was profound and immediate, the kind of connection that exists between child and animal, untainted by the complications of adult relationships. Bailey didn't care if Sarah worked late. Bailey didn't care about custody agreements or legal filings. Bailey loved Emma with a purity that transcended human complexity. But David's attorney had insisted on Bailey's absence from the courtroom. Emotional manipulation, Catherine had called it, her voice dripping with disdain. The child will use the dog to elicit sympathy from the judge. Judge Patricia Henderson, bound by the rules of evidence and legal procedure, had reluctantly agreed. And so Bailey had been left in the car with Sarah's sister Janet, who sat in the driver's seat with the windows cracked open, occasionally getting out to walk the dog around the parking lot, keeping her calm and hydrated. Emma missed Bailey desperately. The stuffed animal in her hands was a poor substitute for the real thing, but it was something. She pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes, imagining herself back at home, on the couch, with Bailey's warm body curled up beside her, the dog's soft fur against her face, the slow, steady rhythm of the animal's breathing calming her own racing heart. "Emma," Marcus Johnson, Sarah's attorney, appeared around the corner, his briefcase in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and the kind face of someone who had seen too much of human cruelty but refused to become cynical. He'd been practicing family law for 25 years, and he had an impressive track record, but this case was different. This case involved a child who loved both of her parents, and no amount of legal maneuvering could change that fundamental reality. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked, though the question was directed more at Sarah than at Emma. He crouched down slightly to Emma's eye level. "Hey there, Emma, you doing okay?" Emma shrugged. She'd been coached by Marcus on what to expect, what questions might be asked, how to answer truthfully without embellishing or exaggerating. The attorney had emphasized the importance of honesty, of simply telling the judge about her life, about her relationship with her mother. But what Marcus hadn't prepared Emma for was the visceral fear of being caught in the middle, of knowing that her words would be used as weapons in a war between two people she loved. "I'm scared," Emma admitted, her voice cracking slightly. Marcus's expression softened. "I know you are, sweetie, but you're going to be great. You just tell the judge the truth about your mom, about how much she loves you, about how she takes care of you. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, though she didn't feel confident. She'd heard her father's accusations during a previous conversation, that her mother was never home, that Emma was basically raising herself, that her mother only cared about work. Emma had tried to defend her mother, but David had brushed off her explanations with the certainty of a man who had already made up his mind. The truth was far more nuanced. Yes, Sarah worked, but Sarah also made Emma's lunch every morning before work. Sarah helped with homework every evening. Sarah attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. Sarah had rearranged her schedule countless times to be present for her daughter. But one late night at the office, one missed pickup that had to be handled by a babysitter, one canceled weekend trip, these moments had been magnified and weaponized into a narrative of neglect. A bailiff appeared in the hallway. "We're ready for the 10 a.m. hearing," she announced. "All parties should prepare to enter the courtroom." Sarah stood, her legs slightly unsteady. She took Emma's hand and gently pulled her to her feet. The little girl clutched the stuffed Bailey tighter, as if the toy could somehow protect her from what was about to happen. "Remember," Marcus said, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder, "the judge is a professional. She's seen hundreds of these cases. She understands that life is complicated, that parents aren't perfect, but that doesn't make them bad mothers." They walked toward the courtroom doors. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Through the courthouse window, she caught a glimpse of Bailey in the car, still watching the building with those intelligent brown eyes, still waiting for Emma. What Sarah didn't know yet was that those intelligent brown eyes, that unconditional love, that pure bond between girl and dog, these things would become the most powerful arguments in the entire courtroom. What she didn't know was that Emma's courage, her truth, her desperate love for both her mother and her dog would change everything. As they entered courtroom 7B, the doors closed behind them, and Emma's fate, along with Sarah's and Bailey's, hung in the balance. Judge Patricia Henderson entered the courtroom with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to command. She was a woman in her mid-60s, with silver hair styled in a neat bob and reading glasses hanging from a thin beaded chain around her neck. She'd been sitting on the family law bench for 24 years, and in that time she had presided over countless custody battles, witnessed the dissolution of countless marriages, and made decisions that would ripple through families for generations. Her face bore the weight of all those decisions, a face that had learned to remain impassive, to show neither sympathy nor judgment, to be the steady hand that guided the machinery of justice. The courtroom itself was a study in institutional severity. The walls were paneled in dark wood, the floor a polished gray marble that echoed with every footstep. The judge's bench loomed at the front of the room, elevated on a platform, a physical manifestation of authority and power. Behind the bench hung the seal of the state, a reminder of the gravity of the proceedings about to unfold. The gallery was sparse. A handful of observers, a court reporter perched at her station ready to record every word, and in the back row, Emma sat between Sarah and Marcus, looking impossibly small in an adult world. David Mitchell sat at the opposite table, his expression a carefully calculated blend of concern and determination. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with dark hair graying at the temples and the polished look of someone who worked in finance. He wore an expensive suit, custom-tailored, undoubtedly, and next to him sat his attorney, Catherine Wells, a woman with a reputation that preceded her. Catherine was in her late 40s with sharp features and sharper instincts. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her clothing was expensive but severe, a uniform designed to project authority and competence. She had won 17 of her last 18 custody cases, and she carried that success like a weapon. As Judge Henderson took her seat, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. She banged her gavel once, a sound that echoed through the room like a gunshot. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced formally. "The matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell, custody of minor child Emma Mitchell." Judge Henderson adjusted her reading glasses and reviewed the documents in front of her. The preliminary filings had been extensive: character references, financial records, work schedules, medical reports, school records, and the competing narratives of two parents who had once loved each other and now couldn't agree on anything. Catherine Wells stood with the fluid confidence of a predator entering familiar hunting grounds. This was her element, her stage, her opportunity to construct a narrative so compelling that Judge Henderson would have no choice but to rule in her client's favor. "Your Honor," Catherine began, her voice carrying perfectly pitched tones of concern and professionalism, "this case, while complicated on the surface, is fundamentally quite simple. It is about a child who needs stability, structure, and present parents. It is about a mother who has prioritized her career over her daughter's well-being, and it is about a father who is prepared to step into the role of primary caregiver." She paused for effect, letting her opening statement settle over the courtroom like a fog. "The evidence will demonstrate," Catherine continued, turning slightly to face the gallery as if speaking to an invisible jury, "that Sarah Mitchell is a woman consumed by ambition, that she has repeatedly placed her work obligations above her daughter's emotional needs, that Emma has been left in the care of babysitters and daycare providers, while her mother pursues increasingly demanding positions at her law firm. And most troublingly, the evidence will show that this pattern of neglect has caused measurable harm to Emma's emotional development." Sarah felt her hands clench beneath the table. Marcus placed a steadying hand on her knee, a silent signal to remain composed. Catherine pulled out a stack of documents. "The respondent, Sarah Mitchell, has worked an average of 60 to 70 hours per week over the past 18 months. She has canceled family vacations due to work emergencies. She has missed school pickups, requiring her daughter to be transported by paid childcare providers. She has been late to important medical appointments. And most damning of all, the respondent's own daughter has reported anxiety symptoms, nightmares, inability to concentrate at school, behavioral problems, all consistent with a child who feels neglected and insecure." Judge Henderson made notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. Emma's eyes widened as she heard these descriptions. They were technically true, but they felt like lies, twisted and distorted until they became something unrecognizable. "The petitioner, David Mitchell," Catherine said, turning toward David with an expression of warm approval, "is a devoted father who has consistently maintained involvement in Emma's life. He has flexible work hours that allow him to be present for his daughter. He maintains a stable home, and he is engaged in every aspect of Emma's development. Moreover, my client has found a partner, Lisa Chen, a schoolteacher with genuine expertise in child development and a genuine passion for children's well-being. Catherine nodded toward David's fiancée, a young woman in her early 30s who sat in the gallery looking sympathetic and composed. Lisa had been carefully chosen to present the appearance of stability and maternal warmth, exactly what Catherine needed to paint David's household as a superior alternative to Sarah's. Marcus stood for his preliminary statement, but Catherine had already set the tone. The narrative was seductive, well-constructed, and devastating in its implications. Marcus tried to recalibrate the story, to present Sarah as a dedicated single mother working hard to provide for her daughter, but the damage had been done. The judge's initial expression had shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes that suggested she was already forming preliminary judgments. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every word, every pause, every inflection for the record. The words became law, became reality, became the foundation upon which the judge would build her decision. Catherine's first witness was David himself. He was an excellent witness, composed, articulate, and seemingly reluctant to criticize his ex-wife, which made his criticisms all the more damaging. He spoke about Emma's anxiety, about the weekends when Emma would call him crying because her mother was working. He discussed his own commitment to fatherhood, the flexibility of his job, his genuine desire to provide Emma with a stable, present parental figure. "I love Sarah," David said at one point, his voice conveying genuine sadness. "But I think she's lost sight of what's important. She's lost sight of Emma." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus's cross-examination was competent but unable to land significant blows. David was too well prepared, too skilled at presenting himself as the aggrieved party who simply wanted what was best for his daughter. Catherine's next witness was Emma's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who had been subpoenaed by David's legal team. She testified that Emma sometimes seemed distracted in class, that she'd noticed the child appeared anxious, that on several occasions Emma had mentioned wishing her mother was home more often. What Mrs. Patterson didn't testify to was that Emma was an excellent student overall, that she was kind and considerate to her classmates, that she participated in school activities, and showed no signs of serious emotional disturbance beyond the normal stress any child experiences when their parents divorce. By lunchtime, the courtroom energy had shifted. The narrative Catherine Wells had constructed was gaining weight, gaining credibility. Judge Henderson's expression had grown more closed, less sympathetic to Sarah's plight. During the lunch recess, Sarah sat in a small consultation room with Marcus, barely touching her sandwich. Her hands shook as she lifted a coffee cup to her lips. "She's winning," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "I can see it on the judge's face. She's already decided." Marcus wanted to offer reassurance, but he was too honest to provide false comfort. "Catherine Wells is extremely skilled," he admitted, "but the judge hasn't heard from you yet, and she hasn't heard from Emma. The judge will listen to Emma. Children's voices matter." But Sarah wasn't comforted. She knew that Catherine Wells was preparing to cross-examine Emma, to twist her daughter's innocent words into weapons against her mother. And Sarah knew that a 9-year-old, however intelligent and articulate, couldn't compete with a skilled cross-examiner. In the car in the parking lot below, Bailey rested her chin on the window ledge, watching the courthouse, sensing that something important was happening inside those walls. The dog didn't understand custody law or judicial procedure, but she understood that Emma needed her, and that understanding was the only truth that mattered. Back in the courtroom, as the afternoon session was about to begin, Judge Henderson reviewed her notes. The first day of hearings had presented a troubling picture of Sarah Mitchell, a woman so consumed by work that she had neglected her most important responsibility. Judge Henderson had presided over hundreds of cases, and she prided herself on her ability to see through deception and manipulation. But Catherine Wells was good, very good. and the narrative she had constructed seemed airtight, unassailable, damning. As Catherine Wells stood to call her next witness, she smiled with the satisfaction of a prosecutor who knew she was winning a case. She didn't know yet that everything she had built, every carefully constructed argument, every twisted truth, was about to come crashing down. She didn't know that a 9-year-old girl and her beloved dog were about to teach her a lesson about the limitations of legal maneuvering in the face of genuine human truth. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as the bailiff called her name. It was a moment she had dreaded since the day her mother had first told her about the custody hearing. She had imagined it 1,000 times, sitting in that witness stand, all those eyes on her, being asked questions that felt impossible to answer. "Emma Mitchell," the bailiff announced formally, "please stand and raise your right hand." Emma stood on trembling legs. She was so small that Sarah had to suppress a maternal instinct to run to her daughter and scoop her into her arms. Instead, Sarah gripped the table in front of her, her knuckles turning white with tension. Emma raised her right hand, placing her left hand on the Bible the bailiff presented to her. The Bible seemed enormous in her small hands. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff intoned. "I do," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the silent courtroom. The walk to the witness stand seemed to take an eternity. Emma's pink Mary Jane shoes clicked softly against the marble floor with each step. She climbed into the elevated chair, and suddenly she was sitting higher than most of the adults in the room, yet somehow she felt impossibly small and vulnerable. Her legs didn't reach the footrest, and they swung slightly as she settled into the chair. The microphone in front of her was positioned at eye level with an adult. Emma had to look up slightly to speak into it. Judge Henderson made a note to have it adjusted. Catherine Wells approached with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. A child witness could be unpredictable, but Catherine was a master at managing child testimony. She knew how to ask questions that seemed innocent but were carefully designed to elicit damaging responses. She knew how to use a child's natural desire to please adults, to tell stories that would help the person asking the questions. She knew, in short, how to make a 9-year-old girl into an unwitting weapon against her own mother. "Hello, Emma," Catherine said sweetly. "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm going to ask you some questions today, okay?" "Okay," Emma replied, her voice small. "Emma, do you know what an oath is?" Catherine asked, establishing a baseline of understanding. "It means I have to tell the truth," Emma said. "That's exactly right. Very good." Catherine's tone was approving, designed to make Emma want to please her, to answer her questions in ways that would earn that approval. "Emma, I want you to know that this is a safe place and you can tell me anything, okay?" "Okay." Catherine took a step closer to the witness stand, her body language conveying intimacy and trust. "Emma, do you love your father?" Sarah felt her breath catch. This was the opening salvo, a seemingly innocent question designed to establish that Emma cared about David, which would make subsequent testimony about Sarah's failings more credible. "Yes," Emma answered, glancing briefly toward her father. "And do you love your mother?" "Yes," Emma said again, this time glancing at Sarah with worried eyes. "I'm sure you do," Catherine said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Emma, I want to ask you about something. How much time do you spend with your mother? I mean, really spend time with her doing things together." Emma's forehead wrinkled as she considered the question. We spend time on weekends usually, and sometimes after school." "After school," Catherine repeated, as if confirming information she already knew. "And who picks you up from school usually?" Emma's hands gripped the arms of the witness stand. She knew what the honest answer was, and she also knew that the honest answer would hurt her mother. "A babysitter," she said quietly. "Most days, except Fridays when Mom picks me up." "A babysitter," Catherine repeated, nodding as if this confirmed her entire narrative. "So your mother is usually working when you get out of school?" "Yeah," Emma said, her voice growing quieter. "And when you get home with the babysitter, is your mother there?" Emma shook her head. "Not usually, she comes home later." Sarah closed her eyes. Each answer was technically true, but together they were painting a portrait of an absent mother. What they didn't capture was the phone calls Sarah made during the afternoon, checking on Emma's day. What they didn't show was Sarah's rush to leave the office to make it home by dinner most nights. What they didn't explain was that Emma was in a safe, supervised environment while Sarah was working, because Sarah had wanted to give her daughter every opportunity, including a good education, which required money. "Emma," Catherine continued, her voice taking on a note of gentle concern, "has your mother ever had to work when you wanted to spend time with her? Times when you wanted to do something together but she had to work instead?" "Yeah," Emma admitted. "Like once we were supposed to go to the movies on a Saturday, but Mom had to go into the office." "Oh no," Catherine said, her voice conveying sympathy. "That must have made you feel sad." "It did," Emma said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Sarah wanted to scream. Yes, there had been that one Saturday in March when a client emergency had come up. She had rescheduled the movie for the following week. She had taken Emma to see the same movie they'd planned to see, and they'd had lunch at Emma's favorite restaurant afterward. But all Catherine had presented was the disappointment, not the rescheduled joy. "Emma," Catherine asked, her voice now taking on a more serious tone, "have you noticed that your mother seems stressed or tired a lot? That she's worried about work?" Emma nodded slowly. "Sometimes. She talks on her phone about work a lot." "And does that make you worry? Does that make you feel like your mom is more interested in work than in you?" Marcus stood up abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The attorney is leading the witness and putting words in the child's mouth." Judge Henderson nodded. "Sustained. Ms. Wells, rephrase your question without the leading language." "Of course, Your Honor," Catherine said smoothly, as if she hadn't just crossed a line. "Emma, how do you feel when your mother talks about work and seems stressed?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. The witness stand suddenly felt very lonely. "I feel worried, like maybe she doesn't want to be home with me." The words hung in the courtroom like a bombshell. Emma immediately regretted saying them. She looked at her mother, and when she saw the pain in Sarah's face, she felt a surge of guilt so powerful it made her stomach ache. Catherine nodded sympathetically, as if Emma had just confirmed her entire case. "Thank you for being so honest, Emma. That took courage." Marcus stood to conduct his cross-examination, but Emma was already emotionally raw. The little girl had been manipulated into saying things that were technically true but contextually devastating. Her testimony had been poisoned, her words twisted, her natural childhood anxieties weaponized against her mother. Marcus tried to rehabilitate her testimony, asking gentler questions about the time she and her mother did spend together, about Sarah's love for her, about the ways Sarah was present and involved in Emma's life. But Emma was too confused, too frightened, too aware that she had somehow betrayed her mother. Her responses became halting and uncertain. When Catherine objected to questions, Emma seemed to accept that she had done something wrong. By the time Emma was excused from the witness stand, she felt like she had failed everyone. The walk back to sit between her mother and Marcus seemed to take hours. Sarah squeezed her hand and whispered, "You did great, sweetheart. That wasn't your fault." But the words didn't penetrate Emma's sense of guilt and shame. Judge Henderson made extensive notes. Catherine Wells had successfully used Emma's testimony to paint a picture of a child neglected by an ambitious mother, a child who yearned for more time with her parent but who was consistently disappointed. The judge's expression had grown increasingly sympathetic toward David's case. As the afternoon session continued, Catherine called additional witnesses, David's new fiancée, Lisa, who testified about her experience as a teacher and her ability to provide a structured, child-centered home environment. A child psychologist who had been retained by David's legal team testified that childhood anxiety often resulted from parental inconsistency and work-related stress. Each witness added another layer to the narrative of Sarah's inadequacy. Sarah felt as though she was drowning. The system that was supposed to protect her rights, to ensure that justice was served, seemed to be actively conspiring against her. Catherine Wells moved through the courtroom with the confidence of someone who was winning, who had seized control of the narrative and was never going to let it go. As the judge adjourned the hearing for the day, Sarah's face was a mask of controlled devastation. Emma looked hollow-eyed and guilty. And in the parking lot 3 stories below, Bailey pressed her nose against the car window, still waiting, still watching, still hoping that Emma would come back to her. Neither Sarah nor Emma knew it yet, but that dog waiting in the parking lot held the key to everything. That dog represented something that no lawyer, no judge, no carefully constructed narrative could ever fully capture: the pure, transcendent power of unconditional love. The second day of the hearing dawned gray and oppressive. Sarah had barely slept. She'd spent the night reviewing the court transcripts, reading Catherine Wells's carefully constructed narrative, and trying to figure out how to stop the inevitable. Emma had called her 3 times during the night, voice thick with tears and guilt, asking if she'd messed things up, asking if she was going to have to live with her father now. Each call had broken Sarah's heart a little more. By the time they arrived at the courthouse, Sarah looked like a woman who had been through a war. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. The navy suit from the previous day looked slept-in, wrinkled, defeated. She held Emma's hand as they walked through the courthouse corridors, both of them moving in a daze. Marcus met them in the hallway outside the courtroom. His expression told Sarah everything she needed to know. "David's taking the stand this morning," he said quietly. "Catherine has prepared him extensively. He's going to be a strong witness." "How strong?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Very," Marcus admitted. "He's articulate, sympathetic, and he's had time to craft his narrative. We'll do our best in cross-examination, but Sarah, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this isn't going well for us." Sarah nodded numbly. The possibility had already begun to feel like certainty. The courtroom filled again as Judge Henderson took her seat. Catherine Wells stood with the confidence of someone who had seized control of the proceedings and had no intention of relinquishing it. David took the witness stand, and immediately he began his performance, because it was a performance, though a masterful one. Under Catherine's careful questioning, David presented himself as the devoted father he claimed to be. He spoke about his flexible work schedule, about how he had always made time for Emma even during the divorce proceedings. He discussed his stable home, his involvement in Emma's school and activities, his commitment to being a present and engaged parent. "I love Sarah," David said at one point, his voice conveying genuine sadness. "We just want different things. She wants her career. I want to be a father. I don't think those things are compatible in our case." The statement was a masterpiece of manipulation. It wasn't technically a lie. He did love Sarah, or a version of love as David understood it. But it also fundamentally misrepresented the truth. Sarah didn't want her career over Emma. Sarah worked because she had to, because she was a single mother supporting her daughter, because she wanted to provide a good life for her child. David continued, painting a picture of Emma's life in his household. "With Lisa," he said, "Emma would have a mother figure who is home every day. Lisa is a teacher, so she understands child development. She would be able to help Emma with homework, attend school events, provide the kind of consistent maternal presence that Sarah just can't offer right now." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, in your opinion, what would be the effect of the current custody arrangement continuing?" David paused as if the question pained him. "I think Emma will continue to suffer. I think her anxiety will worsen. I think she'll come to resent her mother for not being available. And I think eventually, when Emma is a teenager, when these bonds are supposed to be forming, Sarah will realize what she's lost. But by then it might be too late. It was devastating testimony. David had managed to position himself as the hero, as the father who was willing to sacrifice his relationship with his career-driven ex-wife in order to protect his daughter from emotional damage. The courtroom seemed to hang on his every word. Marcus's cross-examination was competent, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche with a feather. David was too prepared, too skilled at responding to challenging questions. When Marcus asked about David's own work schedule, the late nights at the office, the business trips, David responded smoothly that he had recently restructured his career specifically to be more present for Emma. "That's commendable," Marcus said, unable to suppress a note of sarcasm. "And when exactly did you make this career change, Mr. Mitchell?" "6 months ago," David replied, "when I realized that Emma needed me more than I needed the stress of my old position." The timeline was convenient, suspiciously convenient, but the damage was done. Judge Henderson had made another note, and her expression had shifted further away from sympathy for Sarah. By the time David was excused from the witness stand, the momentum had shifted decisively. The courtroom felt like a sinking ship, and Sarah was going down with it. During the lunch recess, Sarah sat in the consultation room with Marcus, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. The panic was setting in, real, visceral panic at the possibility of losing her daughter. "We need to talk about settlement," Marcus said quietly. "If David is willing to offer you reasonable visitation, maybe every other weekend, 1 weeknight per week, we should seriously consider it. Fighting this to a decision is getting riskier." "No," Sarah said, her voice sharp with desperation. "I'm not settling. Emma is my daughter. I love her more than anything in this world. I'm not going to sign away my parental rights based on some twisted narrative that Catherine Wells has constructed." "Sarah, I understand your feelings, but—" "You don't," Sarah interrupted, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what it's like to have someone systematically dismantle your relationship with your child. You don't understand what it's like to listen to your 9-year-old testify against you, to hear her say that she thinks you don't want to be with her, when the truth is that every single decision I make is about her. Every promotion I've turned down because it would require too much travel. Every client I've referred to other attorneys because they demanded too much time. Every night I go to bed exhausted because I've been up late working so I can be present during the day." Tears streamed down her face. Marcus handed her a tissue box, his expression sympathetic but helpless. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I'm not giving up, not yet." That afternoon, as the hearing resumed, Emma was brought into the courtroom to sit in the gallery again. The little girl had dark circles under her eyes. She'd spent the morning with a court-appointed counselor who had explained what was happening in age-appropriate terms. Emma understood on some level that her testimony had been used against her mother. The guilt was eating her alive. Catherine Wells called a medical expert, Dr. Richard Patterson, a child psychologist who had reviewed Emma's school records and the testimony from the previous day. He testified that Emma's anxiety symptoms were consistent with parental stress, that the pattern of emotional inconsistency and work-related parental absence was textbook in terms of causing childhood psychological distress. "In your professional opinion," Catherine asked, "would a more structured environment with a parent who is consistently present help alleviate Emma's anxiety symptoms?" "Absolutely," Dr. Patterson replied. "Children thrive with consistency and presence. They develop secure attachments when they have a caregiver who is reliably available. The evidence suggests that Emma is not receiving that level of consistent presence from her mother." Marcus cross-examined Dr. Patterson, pointing out that the psychologist had never actually interviewed Emma, that he was basing his conclusions solely on documented anxiety symptoms and testimony that had been carefully curated by David's legal team. But the damage was done. The expert had lent scientific credibility to the narrative that Sarah was failing her daughter. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah felt something inside her breaking. The system was supposed to protect her. The judge was supposed to listen to evidence objectively. But what was happening in that courtroom wasn't justice. It was a carefully choreographed performance designed to separate a mother from her child. When court adjourned for the day, Sarah and Emma walked to the car in silence. Emma's small hand felt cold in Sarah's grip. Neither of them had spoken more than a few words since morning. In the car, as they drove home, Emma stared out the window with hollow eyes. "Mom," Emma whispered as they pulled into their driveway. "Yes, baby." I'm sorry I said those things. I didn't mean to hurt you." Sarah pulled the car into the garage and unbuckled her seatbelt. She turned to face her daughter, and seeing the girl's devastated expression, she pulled Emma into her arms. They held each other in the darkness of the garage, both of them broken, both of them terrified of what tomorrow would bring. 3 stories below the courthouse, in a parking lot that had become all too familiar, Bailey sat in a car that had been parked there for most of the day. The dog pressed her nose against the window, still watching, still waiting, still hoping that Emma would return. Bailey didn't understand custody law or judicial procedure, but the dog understood heartbreak when she felt it, and somehow, across the distance and the buildings that separated them, Bailey could feel Emma's despair. If Bailey could have spoken, she would have told Emma something that no lawyer, no judge, no expert witness could ever understand. That love wasn't measured in hours or presence or perfect parenting. That love was measured in loyalty, in the choice to stay, in the decision to show up even when it was hard. And that sometimes, the most powerful voice in a courtroom wasn't human at all. But Bailey couldn't speak. All the dog could do was wait, and hope, and love with a purity that would soon change everything. The 3rd day of the hearing dawned cold and bitter. Emma hadn't slept properly in over 48 hours. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her stuffed Bailey clutched against her chest, her mind spinning with guilt and fear. At some point during the night, she had made a decision born of desperation and the primal need to fix what she believed she had broken. If she had caused this problem with her testimony, then maybe she could fix it. Maybe there was something she could say, something she could do, that would make the judge understand that she loved her mother, that her mother wasn't the neglectful person Catherine Wells had described. Sarah found Emma awake at 5:47 a.m., sitting on the kitchen counter in her pajamas, swinging her legs back and forth with mechanical precision. "Couldn't sleep?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer written across her daughter's pale face. "Mom, I need to tell the judge something," Emma said, her voice urgent and intense. "I need to tell her that I lied, or not lied exactly, but I need to explain. I need to make her understand." Sarah's heart broke all over again. She pulled Emma into her arms, but the girl was rigid, tense with determination and desperation. "You didn't lie, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "You told the truth. What Catherine Wells did was twist your truth into a story about me, but you didn't lie." "But it hurt you," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Everything I said hurt you, and the judge is listening to it and she's believing it, and she's going to take me away from you because of what I said." Sarah couldn't respond. She held her daughter and let the girl cry, and inside she was screaming. This was the real damage of the custody battle. This was what no judge could quantify, no lawyer could argue, no expert witness could analyze. The damage was happening to her 9-year-old daughter's soul. By the time they arrived at the courthouse, Emma was moving like a zombie. Her dark eyes were hollow, her small face pinched with worry. Sarah held her hand as they walked through the familiar hallways, past the sympathetic security guards who had begun to recognize them, past the other families caught in their own legal dramas. Marcus was waiting for them outside the courtroom, his expression grave. "Catherine's calling one more witness this morning," he said. "Then we'll have the opportunity to present our case. Sarah, I want to call you to testify. I want the judge to hear from you about your relationship with Emma, about your commitment to her, about why you work as much as you do." "Will that help?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would likely be no. "It's our only real option at this point," Marcus said quietly. "We need to present an alternative narrative. We need the judge to hear from you directly." Catherine Wells's final witness was a neighbor, a woman named Patricia who lived across the street from David's house. Patricia testified that she had seen Emma at David's home multiple times over the past year, that the girl seemed happy and well-adjusted there, that David appeared to be very involved and attentive to Emma's needs. Patricia also testified, in response to carefully worded leading questions from Catherine, that she rarely saw Emma at Sarah's house, and when she did, the girl seemed anxious and clingy. The testimony was damaging in its specificity. These were observations from someone who wasn't directly involved in the case, someone who could present herself as an impartial observer. But Patricia's observations were skewed by her proximity to David's house and her limited exposure to Sarah's life. She didn't see the mornings when Sarah made Emma's breakfast. She didn't see the evenings when Sarah helped with homework. She didn't see the weekends when Sarah and Emma went to the park, or explored the city, or just lay on the couch together watching movies. When Marcus cross-examined Patricia, he pointed out her obvious bias, her limited window of observation, her exposure to only one side of Emma's life. But by then the damage was done. The narrative was complete. Catherine Wells had built a fortress of testimony, expert opinions, and observations that all pointed to the same conclusion. Sarah Mitchell was an inadequate mother, and Emma would be better off in David's care. By mid-morning, Marcus stood to present Sarah's case. The gallery had filled with more observers now. Word had apparently spread through the courthouse that this custody battle was worth watching. Sarah stood and walked to the witness stand, her legs feeling like they were made of water. As Marcus began his questioning, Sarah tried to present her perspective. She discussed her work, her reasons for working as much as she did. She talked about the sacrifices she had made for Emma, the promotions she'd turned down, the client relationships she'd ended, the evenings she'd spent at home even when she had work she needed to do. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus asked, "why do you work?" "To provide for my daughter," Sarah answered simply. "To give her a stable home, to pay for her school, her activities, her health care, to give her opportunities." "And do you love your daughter?" "More than anything in the world," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. But then Catherine Wells began her cross-examination, and everything shifted. She attacked Sarah's testimony with surgical precision, asking pointed questions about why she had prioritized work over family, why she had missed pickups, why Emma reported feeling anxious about her mother's work schedule. "Ms. Mitchell, when you were working late at the office, who was watching your daughter?" "A trusted babysitter." "A stranger, essentially," Catherine interrupted. "Someone Emma wasn't as bonded with as she is with you." "She was supervised and safe." "But not with her mother, correct?" Each exchange was designed to make Sarah look defensive, calculating, willing to outsource her parental responsibilities. Catherine was a maestro with the written word, with testimony, with the manipulation of facts. And under her relentless questioning, Sarah began to look less like a devoted mother and more like someone who was caught in her own contradictions. Emma watched from the gallery, her small body rigid with tension. She saw her mother struggling, saw Catherine Wells circling like a shark, saw the judge's expression growing darker. At one point, Emma's hand drifted to her pocket where she had placed something that morning, something she had written in the middle of the night when sleep wouldn't come. By the time Catherine finished her cross-examination, Sarah looked devastated. Marcus's redirect questioning couldn't repair the damage Catherine had done. The narrative had been cemented, the conclusion seemed inevitable. As Sarah walked back to her seat, She felt like she was walking through water, moving in slow motion. Emma reached out and squeezed her mother's hand, but neither of them could speak. There was nothing left to say. Judge Henderson called for a lunch recess, and the courtroom emptied. Sarah and Marcus retreated to their consultation room again, where the attorney spoke in quiet, measured tones about the reality of their situation. "I'm not going to lie to you," Marcus said. "Based on everything I've heard, the judge is leaning heavily toward David's position. Her questions on cross-examination were pointed at Sarah. She seems to have accepted Catherine's narrative that Emma would be better off with her father. At this point, we need to seriously consider a settlement that protects your interests." "Stop," Sarah said, holding up a hand. "I can't hear this right now." She stood and walked to the small window in the consultation room. Below, in the parking lot, she could see the car where Bailey had been waiting for 3 days. Her sister Janet was outside the car with the dog, walking in circles in the parking lot, trying to keep Bailey calm and exercised while they waited for a custody hearing that seemed increasingly likely to separate the dog from the child who loved her most. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. She thought about everything she had sacrificed, everything she had endured, everything she had fought for, and she thought about how none of it seemed to matter. The system wasn't listening. The judge wasn't listening. Catherine Wells had constructed a narrative so compelling, so airtight, that the truth couldn't break through. In the gallery, Emma sat alone, her small hand still gripping the piece of paper in her pocket. It was a letter, something she had written in desperation at 3 a.m., her handwriting shaky and childlike. She had written it because she didn't know what else to do. She had written it because she was 9 years old and her world was falling apart and she needed someone to understand. The afternoon session was about to begin. The judge would deliver closing arguments from both sides. Then the judge would take the matter under advisement and render a decision, probably within a few days. And based on everything that had happened so far, that decision seemed all but predetermined. Emma pulled the letter from her pocket and held it, feeling the weight of it in her small hands. She had shown it to her mother that morning, and Sarah had read it with tears streaming down her face. Sarah had suggested that Emma keep it, that it was private and precious. But Emma was thinking about showing it to the judge. Emma was thinking about doing something that nobody expected, something that might break through the carefully constructed narrative, something that might remind the adults in that courtroom what this was really all about. Emma took a deep breath. In a few minutes, she would make a decision that would change everything. But for now, she sat in the gallery, holding her letter, and waited for the moment when she would finally find her voice. Outside in the parking lot below, Bailey pressed her nose against the car window and watched the courthouse, waiting for Emma to come home. The afternoon session began with Catherine Wells preparing to deliver her closing argument. She stood before Judge Henderson with the confidence of a warrior who had already won the battle. Her suit was perfectly tailored, her hair not a strand out of place, her expression one of calm certainty. She had constructed a narrative so compelling, so thoroughly supported by testimony and expert opinion, that she knew the judge had no choice but to rule in her client's favor. "Your Honor," Catherine began, her voice resonating through the courtroom with practiced eloquence, "this case, while tragic, is ultimately quite simple. It is about a child who deserves stability, consistency, and a parent who prioritizes her well-being above all else. The evidence presented over the past 3 days has been clear and compelling. Sarah Mitchell, despite her best intentions, has chosen a career path that is fundamentally incompatible with being the primary parent to a 9-year-old child who clearly struggles with anxiety and insecurity." Judge Henderson made notes, her pen moving across the page with steady precision. She seemed barely to glance at Sarah as Catherine continued. "David Mitchell, on the other hand, has demonstrated a genuine commitment to restructuring his life around his daughter's needs. He has made the difficult decision to step back from a demanding career in order to be the present, involved parent that Emma requires. He has found a partner, Lisa Chen, who brings both professional expertise in child development and a genuine passion for Emma's well-being. The choice before the court is not whether Sarah Mitchell loves her daughter. Clearly she does. The choice is whether love is enough when it is demonstrated through occasional presence rather than consistent availability. Catherine gestured toward the gallery, where David sat with an expression of sympathetic concern. The evidence is clear that Emma's anxiety, her emotional insecurity, her sense of being neglected, these are direct results of her mother's unavailability. The solution is equally clear. Emma needs to be with the parent who can provide what she actually needs: consistent presence, emotional availability, and a household where she is not the second priority behind a career. Catherine paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom like sediment in water. The question before this court is not complicated. The answer is clear. Thank you, Your Honor. She sat down with the satisfied expression of someone who had just delivered the final blow in a case she had already won. Marcus stood to deliver his closing argument, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Even before he spoke, everyone seemed to understand how this was going to end. Marcus tried valiantly to present an alternative perspective, to remind the judge that Sarah's work ethic was about providing for her daughter, that Emma's anxiety was a normal response to her parents' divorce, that love and presence weren't mutually exclusive concepts. But his words fell on ears that seemed already closed. As Marcus concluded his argument, Judge Henderson was preparing to make her remarks before taking the case under advisement. She set down her pen and looked up, ready to address the courtroom about the timeline for her decision. But as she prepared to speak, something happened that would change the entire trajectory of the case. Emma stood up. It was a small movement, barely noticeable at first, but it was enough to make every eye in the courtroom turn toward the little girl. Sarah's hand shot out instinctively, trying to gently pull Emma back down into her seat, but Emma resisted with surprising strength. "Your Honor," Emma said, her small voice cracking but determined, "I need to say something." Judge Henderson's expression shifted immediately from judicial impartiality to concern. "Emma, sweetheart, you've already testified. You're not supposed to speak again unless—" "I know," Emma interrupted, and there was something in her voice that made the judge pause. "But I have something I need to tell you, something important." Catherine Wells stood up immediately. "Your Honor, I object. The child has completed her testimony. This is highly irregular and potentially—" "Sit down, Ms. Wells," Judge Henderson said sharply, and there was an edge to her voice that suggested she would not tolerate further interruption. "Emma, come here. Come up to the bench." Emma climbed down from the gallery bench and walked toward the judge's elevated platform. The walk seemed to take an eternity. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on her small frame. Sarah was trembling, unsure whether Emma's action would help or make things worse. Marcus placed a restraining hand on Sarah's arm, though his own expression was tense with uncertainty. Emma climbed the steps to the judge's bench. Judge Henderson leaned down slightly, her severe features softening as she looked at the frightened child in front of her. "Emma," the judge said quietly, "do you understand that you're under oath, that you need to tell the truth?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "And you have something you want to say to me?" Emma nodded. She reached into the pocket of her dress, the pink dress her mother had bought her for the first day of 3rd grade, and pulled out a piece of paper. It was wrinkled and worn, creased from having been folded and refolded multiple times. Her handwriting covered both sides, the letters getting progressively shakier as the letter went on, as if her hands had been getting more and more emotional as she wrote. "I wrote this last night," Emma said, holding the paper out to the judge. "I couldn't sleep and I was scared and I didn't know what else to do, so I wrote this." Judge Henderson took the paper carefully, as if it was made of glass and might shatter. She adjusted her reading glasses and began to read. As she read, her expression changed. Her severe judicial mask began to crack. Her eyes widened. She set the paper down on her desk and looked at Emma with an expression that was no longer judicial but deeply, profoundly human. "Emma, did you write this yourself?" Judge Henderson asked quietly. "Yes," Emma said. "My mom didn't help me. Nobody helped me. I couldn't sleep and I needed to write it." Judge Henderson looked back at the paper and read it again. Tears began to form in her eyes. Sarah, watching from the gallery, tried to read the judge's expression, tried to understand what was happening. "I'm halting these proceedings," Judge Henderson said suddenly, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a bell. "Effective immediately. Ms. Wells, Mr. Johnson, I need to speak with both of you in chambers. Now." She looked at Emma with an expression of infinite gentleness. "Emma, you can sit back down with your mother now, sweetheart. Thank you for your courage." Emma walked back to her mother, who immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter. Sarah was crying, though she still didn't understand what had just happened, what Emma had written that could have caused such a dramatic shift in the judge's demeanor. 15 minutes later, Judge Henderson sat in her private chambers with both attorneys. On her desk lay Emma's letter, and as Catherine Wells and Marcus Johnson read it, they understood why the judge had halted the proceedings. In her childish handwriting, with spelling mistakes and grammatical errors that somehow made it more powerful, Emma had written, "Dear Judge, I love my mom so much. I don't know why everyone is saying she doesn't love me, because she does. She works so much because she wants to give me a good home. She makes my breakfast every morning before work. She helps me with homework every night. She comes to all my school things. Bailey is my dog and Bailey loves my mom too. Bailey knows when my mom is coming home and waits by the door. If my mom doesn't love me, then Bailey doesn't love me either, because Bailey is the best dog in the world and she loves everyone who is good. My dad is nice, but he is not better than my mom. I don't want to live with him instead of my mom. I want to be with my mom. Please don't take me away from my mom. Please. I am sorry for saying things in court that made it sound like my mom was bad, because she is the best mom in the world. I was scared and confused, but I know the truth. My mom loves me more than anything, and I love her. Please let me stay with my mom. Love, Emma." Judge Henderson watched the attorneys' faces as they read the letter. Catherine Wells's expression shifted from confidence to something resembling shock. Marcus Johnson's eyes filled with tears. "This hearing is suspended," Judge Henderson said firmly. "I'm ordering both parents into immediate mediation with a court-appointed family therapist. We will reconvene in 3 months. At that time, if the mediation has been productive, we will reach a resolution based on the best interests of this child, which apparently involves acknowledging that a mother's love can be expressed through work that provides stability and security." She leaned back in her chair and removed her reading glasses. "I've been a judge for 24 years, and I've seen countless custody battles, but I have rarely seen something as clear and as honest as what that child just presented to me. Emma Mitchell just taught 3 lawyers and 1 judge a lesson about the difference between legal procedure and human truth." Catherine Wells left the chambers with her confident demeanor in tatters. David's entire strategy, his carefully constructed narrative, his manipulation of testimony and expert opinion, all of it had been undone by a 9-year-old girl writing from the heart at 3 a.m. When Sarah and Emma left the courthouse that afternoon, they didn't go directly to the car. Instead, they drove to the parking lot where Bailey was waiting. Emma opened the car door and ran to her beloved dog, and Bailey exploded with joy, jumping, spinning, whining with the intensity of a creature who had been separated from her most important person for what felt like an eternity. Sarah watched her daughter and her dog reunite, and she finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. In the courthouse behind them, Judge Henderson sat at her desk, still holding Emma's letter. She read it one more time, and as she read it, she made a silent promise to herself that she would never again allow legal procedure to overshadow human truth. A little girl had reminded her why she had become a judge in the first place, not to win cases or to prove legal theories, but to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that love was recognized and honored even when it didn't fit the expected narrative. 3 months of mandatory mediation passed like a slow thaw in early spring. The therapy sessions were difficult, awkward, and sometimes brutal in their honesty. Judge Henderson had appointed Dr. Alina Martinez, a family therapist with 30 years of experience and a reputation for not accepting excuses or manipulation. Dr. Martinez met with Sarah and David separately and together, forcing them to confront the ways their separation had created collateral damage, the ways their conflict had weaponized their daughter. The first joint session was tense and guarded. Sarah and David sat across from each other in Dr. Martinez's office, a room designed to be non-threatening but which somehow felt like a boxing ring. Between them sat Dr. Martinez, who wasted no time with pleasantries. "I've read the testimony from the custody hearing," Dr. Martinez said, her voice matter-of-fact and clinical. "And I want to be very clear about something. Both of you failed Emma, not because you don't love her. The evidence suggests you both love her very much. You failed her because you put your anger toward each other, your wounded pride, your sense of being wronged, above her emotional well-being." David started to speak, but Dr. Martinez held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Sarah, you work excessively. That's a fact. David, you used Emma's anxiety as a weapon in a custody battle rather than as a signal that you both needed to work together to help your daughter manage it. That's also a fact. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The sessions continued weekly. Slowly, painfully, Sarah and David began to see each other not as enemies, but as two imperfect people who had made imperfect decisions. David admitted that his custody fight had been motivated less by concern for Emma's well-being and more by his own fear that he was being replaced in his daughter's life, that Sarah's career success made him feel inadequate. Sarah, in turn, admitted that she had buried herself in work partly because of her own anxiety about the divorce, her own need to prove that she could provide for Emma without relying on anyone else. She acknowledged that, while her work ethic came from a place of love, she had sometimes used it as an excuse to avoid dealing with the emotional complexity of being a single parent. "I was protecting myself," Sarah said in one session, her voice quiet and vulnerable. "When I was at work, I didn't have to face the fact that Emma was struggling, that I wasn't always available for her, that my choices had consequences I couldn't control." David nodded slowly. "I did something similar," he admitted, "but I did it by trying to take Emma away from you. That was cruel, and it was driven by my own insecurity, not by what was actually best for her." By the third month, the mediation had yielded unexpected fruit. Sarah had negotiated a new arrangement with her law firm, senior counsel position with a guaranteed 45-hour work week instead of the 60-70 hours she'd been working. She would work from home 2 days per week. The reduction in pay was significant, but the increase in presence with Emma was worth it. David, for his part, had been more honest about his own capacity for full-time parenting. He and Lisa had decided to postpone their wedding and slow down their integration as a family unit. David would have Emma every other weekend and 1 weeknight per week for dinner. But the emphasis would no longer be on custody conflict, but on co-parenting collaboration. Most importantly, both Sarah and David had agreed to put Emma's needs first, to stop using her as a pawn in their personal conflict, to prioritize her emotional well-being above their own wounded egos. On the day Judge Henderson was to deliver her final custody ruling, the courtroom was nearly empty. Gone were the observers who had come to witness the custody drama unfold. Gone was the adversarial energy that had characterized the first 3 days of hearings. Instead, there was a sense of resolution, of people moving forward rather than backward. Judge Henderson took her seat and adjusted her reading glasses. She had Emma's letter sitting on her desk, and she occasionally glanced at it as she delivered her ruling. "This court has reviewed the results of the 3-month mediation process," Judge Henderson began, her voice measured and thoughtful. And while this case started as an adversarial custody battle, it has evolved into something more productive, a process of genuine growth and self-reflection by both parents. She looked directly at Sarah and David. I want to be clear about something. Neither of you are bad parents. Both of you love your daughter, and that love was never in question. What was in question was whether you could subordinate your own wounded feelings and personal needs to what your daughter actually requires. Judge Henderson referred to her notes. Based on the mediation report from Dr. Martinez, and based on my own observations over the course of these proceedings, I am issuing the following custody arrangement. Sarah Mitchell shall have primary physical custody of Emma Mitchell. David Mitchell shall have Emma every other weekend, from Friday evening to Sunday evening, and 1 weeknight per week for dinner. Both parents shall share legal custody and shall make major decisions regarding Emma's education, health care, and extracurricular activities jointly. Catherine Wells looked stricken. This was not the resounding victory she had engineered, but Judge Henderson wasn't finished. However, the judge continued, I am adding several provisions to this custody agreement that are somewhat unusual but which I believe are necessary given the circumstances of this case. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, you are to maintain your employment with your law firm at no more than 45 hours per week. You are to have every Wednesday evening and Thursday afternoon free for your daughter, without exception. If you violate this provision, it will be grounds for revisiting this custody arrangement. Sarah nodded, understanding both the support and the warning in the judge's words. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Henderson continued, turning to David, you are to remain actively involved in Emma's life. The every other weekend and 1 weeknight arrangement is not negotiable, and you are to be present and engaged during that time. Engagement means being fully present, not working, not distracted by other priorities. David nodded as well. Then Judge Henderson turned to the most unusual provision, one that had no precedent in her 24 years on the bench. There is one more thing, she said, her severe features softening slightly. Bailey, the family dog, shall remain with Emma at all times. Whether Emma is with her mother or her father, the dog shall accompany her. This animal has served as an emotional support and stabilizing presence for Emma, and I will not separate them without compelling evidence that the animal poses a danger. Bailey is as much a member of this family as Emma is, and she deserves protection under this court's care. She looked directly at Emma, who sat between her parents in the gallery. Emma, your letter changed this case. Your courage and honesty reminded me why I became a judge. You taught me that sometimes the most powerful arguments aren't legal arguments at all. They're the simple, heartfelt words of a child who loves her mother and her dog and just wants her family to stop fighting. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief, not terror. Judge Henderson banged her gavel once. This custody arrangement shall take effect immediately. Both parents are ordered to continue family counseling with Dr. Martinez on a monthly basis for the next year. If there are any subsequent disputes, you are to attempt to resolve them through mediation before returning to this court. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, both Sarah and David said simultaneously. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah reached over and pulled Emma into her arms. David stood separately, but there was a look of acceptance on his face, not defeat, but understanding that this outcome, while not what he had fought for, was actually what Emma needed. Later that afternoon, Sarah, Emma, and Bailey drove home together. Emma sat in the back seat with Bailey's head resting on her lap, the dog's eyes half closed in contentment. Sarah kept looking at her daughter in the rearview mirror, barely able to believe that the nightmare was finally over. Mom, Emma said as they pulled into their driveway. Yes, sweetheart. Are we going to be okay now, you and me? Sarah pulled the car into the garage and turned around to face her daughter. We're going to be more than okay, she said. We're going to be happy, I promise you that. And I'm going to be home more and we're going to have time together, real time. and Bailey is staying with us forever." Emma hugged her mother while Bailey wove between them, licking their faces indiscriminately. In that moment, in the quiet garage of their home, the family was finally whole again. That evening, Sarah sat down at her desk and drafted an email to her law firm. She confirmed her new arrangement: 45 hours per week maximum, 2 days working from home, Wednesday evenings and Thursday afternoons off. She hit send, and as she did, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the weight of guilt, the weight of feeling like she was failing everyone, the weight of trying to be perfect. She didn't need to be perfect, she just needed to be present. Judge Henderson, meanwhile, sat in her chambers and read Emma's letter one more time. She had decided to keep it, to place it in a frame on her desk as a reminder of why she did this work. As a reminder that justice wasn't always about legal procedure or expert testimony or carefully constructed narratives. Sometimes justice was about listening to a 9-year-old girl's truth and allowing that truth to reshape everything. She made a note to herself to look into training programs for child advocacy in the family court system. Emma's courage had inspired her to create systemic changes that would better protect children in future custody disputes. The custody battle was over. The healing had begun. 6 months after Judge Henderson's final ruling, life had transformed into something Emma had almost forgotten was possible, something approaching normal. The house was quiet in the mornings again, the kind of peaceful quiet that comes from a family at ease rather than a family at war. Sarah emerged from her bedroom at 6:30 a.m. to find Emma already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her, Bailey's head resting on her feet. "You're up early," Sarah observed, walking over to kiss the top of her daughter's head. "I wanted to finish my science project before school," Emma said, not looking up from her work. She was 10 years old now, and there was something different about her, a calmness that hadn't been there before, a sense of security that seemed to radiate from deep within. Sarah made Emma's breakfast, scrambled eggs and whole wheat toast, just the way her daughter liked it. This morning ritual had become sacred again, a moment of connection that neither of them took for granted. As they sat together at the kitchen table, Bailey occasionally lifting her head to watch them with those intelligent brown eyes, Sarah felt a gratitude so profound it sometimes caught her by surprise. The new work arrangement had required adjustments. Sarah had taken a modest pay cut, which meant they lived a little more carefully, made fewer spontaneous purchases, thought more deliberately about expenses. But the trade-off was worth every penny. On Wednesdays, Sarah left the office at 4 p.m. sharp, giving her time to pick Emma up from school and take her to her therapy sessions. Not because Emma was troubled, but because Dr. Martinez had recommended continued counseling to help her process the custody battle and rebuild her sense of security. On Thursdays, Sarah worked from home, and the afternoons were sacred. Homework help, art projects, simple time together. The weekends with David had also evolved. What had once been a potential battlefield had transformed into genuine quality time. David had learned, through his own therapy with Dr. Martinez, to be fully present during his time with Emma. His phone stayed in his pocket. His work laptop remained at home. He and Emma did things together: hiking, cooking, going to movies, visiting the zoo. And Bailey went with them every time, a furry ambassador of family unity. Lisa, David's fiancée, had also shifted her approach. Instead of trying to be Emma's mother, she had allowed herself to be what Emma actually needed: a friendly, supportive adult figure who was part of her father's life but not a replacement for Sarah. The wedding had been postponed indefinitely, and both David and Lisa seemed relieved by that decision. They had begun to understand that integrating a child into a new relationship required patience, sensitivity, and a willingness to move slowly. One Thursday afternoon, as Sarah and Emma sat on the back porch with Bailey sprawled between them, Emma said something that made Sarah's heart swell. "I'm glad we went to court," Emma said quietly. Sarah turned to her daughter, surprised. "Really? Even though it was scary?" "Yeah," Emma said, scratching behind Bailey's ears. The dog wagged her tail contentedly. Because it made everyone understand what was actually important. It made Daddy understand that he was fighting about the wrong things. It made you understand that you could work less and still take care of me. And it made the judge understand that sometimes kids know things that adults don't. Sarah pulled her daughter close, marveling at the wisdom of this 10-year-old who had endured something that would have broken most adults. "You're right," Sarah said. "You taught us all something very important." Back at the courthouse, Judge Henderson had made good on her promise. She had begun developing a new protocol for family law cases involving children. She had created a child advocate position, not a lawyer, but a trained professional whose sole purpose was to ensure that children's voices were genuinely heard in custody disputes, rather than being filtered through parental interests and legal maneuvering. Emma's case had become something of a legend among family law professionals. Legal articles were written about it. Judges discussed it at conferences. Therapists referenced it in training seminars. And at the center of all these discussions was a 9-year-old girl's handwritten letter about love and loyalty, and a dog who understood more about family than any legal document ever could. The letter itself had become something of a sacred artifact. Judge Henderson had it framed and displayed on her office wall, where it served as a daily reminder of why she did her work. Sarah had a framed copy on her dresser. David had asked for a copy as well, which Sarah had gladly provided. And Emma herself kept the original draft, slightly more worn now, the folds more creased, in a small box under her bed, along with other treasures of her childhood. A year after the custody hearing, Emma received a letter in the mail. It was from Judge Henderson, sent to Emma's home address. The letter read, "Dear Emma, I wanted to reach out to you personally to tell you how much your courage meant to me. In 25 years of being a judge, I have rarely encountered someone so brave, so honest, and so willing to speak the truth even when it was frightening. You changed not only your family's story but also my understanding of what it means to be a judge. I have created new protocols in our family law system based on lessons I learned from you. Thank you for reminding me that the law is ultimately about protecting people, not procedures. With gratitude and admiration, Judge Patricia Henderson." Emma had read the letter 17 times and had it memorized. She showed it to her friends at school, explaining that this was the judge who had listened to her when she was scared. Her friends found it remarkable that a judge would write to a child. Emma found it remarkable that an adult would listen so carefully to what a child had to say. The summer after the custody ruling, Sarah made a decision. She took 2 weeks off work, something she had been too afraid to do before, and took Emma and Bailey on a road trip to the beach. They drove for 8 hours, stopped at quirky roadside attractions, ate ice cream for dessert every night, and slept in small beach cottages with Bailey's happy face pressed against the window, watching the ocean. On the last night of the trip, as they walked on the beach at sunset, Emma asked her mother a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Do you think Daddy is happy now?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think he's happier," she said. "He's not with me anymore, which is what he wanted. He has Lisa, he has you on weekends, and he's not fighting a battle that was never really about you." "And are you happy?" Emma asked. Sarah stopped walking and looked at her daughter backlit by the setting sun with Bailey's leash wrapped around both their hands. "I'm very happy," Sarah said honestly. "I have you. I have a job I love. I have time to be with you. I have Bailey. I have my health. I have my family and my friends. Yes, Emma, I'm very happy." Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. They continued their walk in silence, the three of them, mother, daughter, and dog, moving along the shore as the sun sank lower and lower toward the horizon. Years later, when Emma was in high school, she would be asked to write an essay for English class titled "A Moment That Changed My Life." She wrote about that day in the courthouse, about standing up in the gallery, about feeling terrified and brave at the same time. She wrote about the letter she had written at 3 a.m., about how words on a page could somehow pierce through all the legal arguments and expert testimony and make someone listen. Her English teacher gave her an A+ and wrote on the essay, "This is a remarkable piece of writing. You have a gift for expressing emotion and truth. Have you considered a career in law or advocacy?" Emma hadn't, but she kept the comment. She kept thinking about Judge Henderson, about how one person's willingness to really listen had changed everything for her family. When Emma was 18, she made a decision. She was going to study to become a family law mediator. She wanted to help other families the way Dr. Martinez had helped hers. She wanted to create spaces where parents could hear each other, where children could be protected, where conflicts could be transformed into understanding. Sarah, when Emma told her this news, cried. But these were the good kind of tears, the kind that come from pride and hope in watching your child become someone extraordinary. Bailey lived to be 14 years old, which in dog years was beyond the typical lifespan for a golden retriever. Those 14 years spanned Emma's entire childhood, from 6 years old to 20 years old. The dog had been there through the darkest days of the custody battle, and through all the bright days that followed. Bailey had slept through Emma's nightmares, had been present at her school graduations, had received countless hugs and ear scratches and declarations of love. When Bailey finally passed away, the entire family grieved together. Sarah, Emma, and even David, who came to the small memorial service Sarah organized. They told stories about the dog, about her quirky habits, about the way she had somehow understood what Emma needed before Emma herself understood it. "Bailey saved our family," Emma said at the service, her voice steady and clear. "Not just because she was there for me, but because she loved so purely and completely that she reminded us all what really matters. She didn't care about custody arrangements or legal arguments. She just loved, and that's what she taught us." Judge Henderson, receiving a copy of Bailey's obituary from Sarah, added it to the wall in her office alongside Emma's letter. Two sacred artifacts, both reminders that sometimes the most powerful legal precedents come not from law books, but from the hearts of children and dogs. Emma would grow up to be exactly what she predicted, a family law mediator. But she would also be something more. She would be a voice for children in the legal system, an advocate for listening, a reminder that procedure must always serve humanity, never the other way around. Years later, when Emma would train other mediators, she would tell them about that day in the courthouse. She would tell them about the fear and the courage, about what it felt like to stand up and speak truth to power. And she would always end with the same lesson. Remember that the people involved in these cases are not legal matters to be won or lost. They are human beings, families, looking for ways to love each other despite pain and anger and misunderstanding. Your job is not to win the case. Your job is to help them remember why they love each other in the first place. Judge Patricia Henderson would retire 3 years later, having transformed the family law system in ways she never could have imagined. When she retired, she donated Emma's framed letter to a legal museum with a plaque that read, "From a 9-year-old girl who taught me that justice begins with listening." And Emma, decades later with her own family, would tell her children about the day she stood up in court and spoke the truth. She would tell them about Bailey, about her mother's courage, about the judge who listened. And she would teach them, as she had been taught, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply tell the truth about what you love. The end. Epilogue: The Lasting Legacy. Emma Mitchell's handwritten letter to Judge Henderson would become more than a personal moment of courage. It would become a symbol that in a legal system often dominated by procedure, precedent, and professional argumentation, the voice of a child expressing genuine love and truth could pierce through everything and change the trajectory of not just one family, but an entire system. Judge Henderson's retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds, lawyers, judges, therapists, social workers, and advocates from the family law field. At the ceremony, they unveiled a plaque outside the family courtroom that read, "This courtroom is dedicated to the principle that justice is ultimately about protecting the most vulnerable among us, our children." We are reminded daily by the courage of one young girl that our role is to listen, to protect, and to ensure that love is recognized and honored even when it doesn't fit the expected narrative. That young girl, Emma Mitchell, would receive an invitation to the ceremony. She attended, now a young woman of 22, already well into her career as a family law mediator. When she saw the plaque, she cried, not from sadness, but from the understanding that her moment of courage, her decision to speak truth, had mattered in ways she never could have imagined. Sarah attended the ceremony as well, watching her daughter with the kind of pride that only a mother can feel. She had built a good life, a life of balance, presence, and genuine connection. She had remarried 3 years earlier to a kind, supportive man who respected her work and understood her commitment to her daughter. Her law practice had thrived even with reduced hours, and she had become known in her field as someone who could handle the most complex cases while maintaining her integrity and her humanity. David attended as well, sitting separately but not awkwardly. He had married Lisa 5 years after the custody hearing ended. They had a child together, Emma's half-sister, who Emma loved fiercely. David had learned through his own journey that being a good father wasn't about winning custody battles or proving points. It was about showing up, being present, and loving with consistency and authenticity. As the three of them, Sarah, Emma, and David, stood in front of that plaque, they were a picture of a family transformed. Not perfect, not without scars, but transformed nonetheless. Transformed by a child's courage, by a judge's willingness to listen, by two parents' commitment to growth, and by a dog's unwavering love. That night, Emma went home to her small apartment where she lived with her partner, a kind and thoughtful woman named Maya. On her bedside table sat two things: a framed copy of Judge Henderson's retirement plaque, and a faded, creased copy of the letter she had written at 3 a.m. when she was 9 years old. Sometimes, when she was working with families in conflict, families on the brink of devastating custody battles, Emma would tell them her story. She would tell them about the day she found her voice, about the power of speaking truth even when you're afraid, about the importance of remembering that love is stronger than law. And in those moments, families would listen. They would hear in Emma's words the possibility of transformation. They would understand that conflict didn't have to be permanent, that understanding was possible, that families could be healed. This is what Emma's courage had unleashed, not just the healing of one family, but the possibility of healing in countless families. One girl, one letter, one moment of truth. That was all it had taken to change everything. The end.